and welcome to India Global. I am Disha Bagchi and these are the headlines. Freak Dubai deluge severely impacts life. Airport authorities ask travellers to stay away. UAE and Oman also hit. Death toll in Oman flooding rises to 18. UK Foreign Minister David Cameron visits Israel after Iran strike. Israel ready to retaliate, says UK Foreign Minister. UK, Germany urge for restraint. IMF lifts global growth forecast. IMF raises India's growth projection to 6.8% in 2024. India's growth expected to remain strong, says the IMF. Today's big story, Dubai, the Middle East financial center, has been paralyzed by heavy rain and storm that has caused widespread flooding across the desert country. The record rainfall has resulted in delays or diverted flights, while cars have been left stranded on the flooded roads. Dubai International Airport, the world's busiest air hub for international passengers, was forced to divert numerous incoming flights as the heavy downpour rendered flight operations dangerous. The airport received nearly 142 millimeters of rain in just 24 hours. On average, Dubai city records 89 millimeters of rain in a year. So the city has received more than a year's rainfall in just a few hours. While many have theorized that these floods are nature's way of pushing back on Dubai's weather-modifying method called cloud seeding, and this is behind this calamity, UAE government's task force responsible for cloud seeding has denied this theory. Listen in to this report.
As the effects of climate change cause havoc across the globe, the desert city of Dubai, a global transit hub, has come to a standstill. Heavy rains and thunderstorms plunged the city into chaos. Flooded roads, stranded commuters, disrupted flights, and even water leaking from mall ceilings. The Dubai International Airport, the world's busiest air hub, where hundreds of thousands of international passengers pass through every day, was forced to cancel or divert hundreds of flights, disrupting air travel and leaving many passengers stranded across the world. As of noon, 79 flights from Dubai were cancelled, while 178 flights were delayed, with the numbers only growing. Videos on social media show planes taxiing on flooded runways and cars half submerged at the airport's parking lot. Such has been the disruption that Dubai airport authorities have asked travelers to stay away. We advise you not to come to the airport unless absolutely necessary, Dubai authorities have said. Indian singer Rahul Vaidya was one of the many passengers who were stranded in the city, wading through knee-deep water. Key buildings throughout the city, from the Dubai Mall and Mall of the Emirates to the various Dubai metro stations, were also left submerged in water.
ये देखो guys, एक दिन की हालत हो गई है. Because I don't think that Dubai is used to. So all the tourists, there are no taxis, nothing.
Various residential areas are also grappling with severe flooding, leaving homes with collapsed roofs and roads completely washed away. Dubai is not the only city to be affected by this unexpected weather. UAE and its neighbors, Bahrain, Oman, among others, have also witnessed heavy rains, with the death toll in Oman rising to 18, with many remaining missing. Bureau Report, NDTV World.
We are joined by Dr. KJ Ramesh, former DG Meteorology, IMD, to talk to us about this incident and the flooding in Dubai. While the UAE government has denied cloud seeding as the cause for these floods, sir, could you explain to us what cloud seeding is?
Cloud seeding is a process where you artificially try to enhance the water holding capacity of the clouds which are naturally forming and then try to extract more rain otherwise normally would have happened.
Right. So Dubai is often seen as essentially a concrete city, and many have suggested that this is also one of the many reasons that it hurts their environment and causes extreme weather. So do you think such factors have played a role in causing this flood?
No, heating is always there in West Asia. Present day, almost they are touching 46 to 50 degrees centigrade during the midday. So temperatures are always warm during this time, this part of the year. And what has really happened was there is a western disturbance which has affected Oman earlier, and then for 2.5 days, nearly 3 days affected Afghanistan. Afghanistan had flooding, and the same system had extended southwards and started getting moisture feed into the system. That's how right from Bahrain, Qatar, northern parts of Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Oman started having extreme precipitation. So over and above from 2002 onwards, UAE has a rain enhancement program of cloud seeding. So their annual rainfall itself is 90 millimeter. So whenever rainy days are very few for them, that too in winter only, and whenever rain bearing clouds develop around them, they tend to do the cloud seeding so that incrementally extra rain falls due to that intervention.
Right. But many have said that this process of cloud seeding hurts the environment even more. So what do you have to say about that?
No, that environmental factor will not be much. Why? Because whatever you are seeding, it comes back with the rain. It doesn't remain in the atmosphere at all. Whatever you seed from the aircraft into the cloud, from top of the cloud, and it comes back to the ground with precipitation itself. It is a silver iodide. At least so far, no such alarming studies are there. This seeded material is environmentally unfavorable.
Right. Well, thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. K.J. Ramesh, for joining us. So, Britain's Foreign Minister, David Cameron, is on a visit to Israel, where he issued one of the starkest warnings yet in the escalation between Iran and Israel, saying Israel has clearly decided to retaliate against Iran for the missile and drone attacks that happened over the weekend. World powers are striving to prevent a wider outbreak of the conflict in the Middle East after Iran attacked Israel with hundreds of missiles and drones, the first time Iran has directly attacked Israel after decades of confrontation by proxies. UK and Germany have urged Israel to show restraint. However, Iran's president has warned that the tiniest invasion by Israel would bring a massive and harsh response as the region braces for potential Israeli retaliation for Iran's attack. Let's listen in to what both of them had to say.
The situation is very concerning. It's right to show solidarity with Israel. It's right to have made our views clear about what should happen next, but it's clear the Israelis are making a decision to act. We hope they do so in a way that does as little to escalate this as possible, and in a way that, as I said yesterday, is smart as well as tough. But the real need is to refocus back on Hamas, back on the hostages, back on getting the aid in, back on getting a pause in the conflict in Gaza.
اگر کوچکترین تعرضی از ناحیه رژیم صهیونیستی به خاک وطن ما صورت بگیرد و به منافع جمهوری اسلامی ایران یقین بدانند برخوردی بسیار شدید و سهمگین با آنها خواهد شد.
The International Monetary Fund has raised India's GDP growth projection for 2024-25 by 30 basis points to 6.8% in its update to the World Economic Outlook, citing buoyant domestic demand. Global growth projections continue to remain at 3.2% in 2024 and 25. Here are the finer details for you.
The International Monetary Fund, in its latest Global Economic Outlook report, envisioned 3.2% worldwide growth for the third straight year, with steady growth and slowing inflation, despite supply chain disruptions across the globe. The IMF said that the world is heading towards a soft landing with 3.2% growth while reining in inflation and producing steady and modest growth. The IMF expects the US economy to grow 2.7% this year, an upgrade from the 2.1% it had predicted in January, and faster than a solid 2.5% expansion in 2023. While economic growth remains strong, many challenges remain for economies across the globe.
The global economy continues to display remarkable resilience, with growth holding steady and inflation declining. But many challenges still lie ahead. Global growth was 3.2% in 2023 and is expected to remain at that level both in 2024 and 2025. This represents a 0.3 percentage point upgrade from our October projections for 2024, with stronger activity than expected in the US, China, and other large emerging markets, but weaker activity in the euro area.
Inflation and sharp price rises remain an obstacle for the globe. However, the IMF predicts global inflation tumbling from 6.8% last year to 5.9% in 2024, while in the world's advanced economies alone, inflation is expected to fall to 2.6% this year and 2% in 2025, brought down by the effects of higher interest rates.
Inflation trends are encouraging, but we are not there yet. Somewhat worryingly, progress towards inflation targets has stalled since the beginning of the year in some countries. This could be a temporary setback, but there are reasons to remain vigilant. Oil prices have been rising, in part due to geopolitical tensions, and services inflation remains stubbornly high in many countries.
The IMF raised India's growth projection to 6.8% in its latest report from its January forecast of 6.5%, citing bullish domestic demand conditions and a rising working age population, with India continuing to remain the fastest growing economy of the world, ahead of China's growth projection of 4.6% during the same period. However, growth in emerging and developing Asia is expected to fall from an estimated 5.6% in 2023 to 5.2% in 2024 Despite the world economy's resilient outlook, the IMF has warned that economic growth could be thrown off course by the continuing adverse effects of higher interest rates and geopolitical tensions, including the wars in Ukraine and Gaza, that have threatened to disrupt crucial trade routes, raising energy prices and more. With Disha Bagchi, Parmeshwar Bava for NDTV.
After former UN employee and whistleblower Emma Reilly levelled serious allegations against the UN, alleging a disturbing nexus between it and the Chinese government, our managing editor, Nikunj Garg, spoke to her about this and more.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have a very special guest today, and she is somebody who's making some very stunning claims that have never been heard before in the history of United Nations. It's a very, very long history, and many people would believe amongst the multilateral organizations across the world, the UN is probably the most credible organization, which has contributed immensely, at least to the world governance, if nothing else. Ms. Reilly, you are making some very, very stunning claims. Welcome to NDTV. On what basis are you making all these stunning claims?
Thank you for having me. On the basis of written evidence, to be frank, I was employed within the UN for 10 years. And from 2013, I started to blow the whistle on the influence of the Chinese Communist Party on the UN Secretariat. I was employed in the UN Human Rights Office, where you would expect that human rights would be the primary goal. But in reality, that office was secretly transmitting the names of people who were about to speak out against China to the Chinese government.
Well, yes. I mean, I'm quite stunned. I read that entire copy in today's Times of India. My dear friend Naomi Canton has filed that copy, and I'm glad that I'm following that up with an interview. But I'm stunned. You are trying to say that the people who were protesting the Chinese policies, the Chinese activists who were protesting the Chinese policies, the United Nations was leaking information on them to the Chinese government.
Exactly. And this started in 2006. And according to the UN's court position in my own court cases, it continues to this day. Privately, the UN admits this openly in court. Those court judgments are public. You can read the latest court judgment in which the judge says that, yes, at all times I have told the truth. But the UN has an absolute lèse-majesté law that says you can never criticize any policy of the UN. So even though this policy is equivalent, it constitutes criminal complicity in torture, it constitutes criminal complicity in arbitrary detention. Even despite that I was telling the truth, the UN says I still had no right to speak up because this is a policy of the Secretary General himself.
Well, that's all right, but I mean, this is unheard of stuff. You're trying to say that the UN is compromised to an extent that it continues to leak information of the very people that it is supposed to protect. I mean, these are individuals, of course, who are standing up against a government policy. Now, there are various pressure groups, various interest groups, various lobbyists, lobbying groups, etc., who can at various points in time protest against the government policy. They not necessarily may be a dissident group, they may not necessarily be a separatist group, but to leak information on them and then to leave them at the mercy of a totalitarian regime like China is quite astounding.
Yes, and some of them gave evidence in my court case as to what happened to their families after their names were handed over. People were arrested, they were detained, they were placed in concentration camps in Xinjiang. Some people's family members died in detention because they spoke out. And the UN should be denouncing that. They should not be facilitating it.
Well, yes, absolutely. I'll come back to your court case slightly later, but then on top of this, which is, sort of compromising the human rights activists that the UN is supposed to protect. That is your allegation, of course. But you also say, Ms. Reilly, that two of the United Nations General Assembly's presidents were bribed. Now, that's almost mind-numbing by the Chinese.
Yes. And there are US courts convicted the Chinese proxies who were committing the bribery in US courts. This is a matter of public record. It's just that in terms of joining the dots, member states have been very behind the curve. So they're aware that these people were bribed. But UN staff members, for example, were found to have been complicit in this bribery and no action was taken against them.
Well, one thing is that, as Naomi also mentions in her article, that Chinese build a sort of diplomatic pressure which makes it almost impossible for any office, any UN office, or for that matter, any other kind of governmental office or non-governmental office to directly take on, because you are saying that they will demand a meeting after meeting, they will, block the passage of any kind of communication, etc., using, various pressure tactics, so to say. But to bribe the top officials is something completely different.
And it's not just the top diplomats in the General Assembly that are essentially being bribed. They also have a $10 million a year slush fund for the Secretary General himself. And if you look at the Secretary General's statements, he has never once criticized China. They obviously feel that they're getting something for that $10 million a year on his pet projects that he cannot get funded in any other way.
But then,
to quote a former US ambassador, Kelly Curry, Antonio Guterres is bought and paid for by China.
But then, Ms. Reilly, many would say that you were sacked, and that is why you have an axe to grind.
I don't. I have never asked anyone to take any action about my firing. I have the communications among the most senior UN officials in which Antonio Guterres' ethics czar wrote directly to him saying that if he were to sack me, he would be breaking his own rules. He went ahead and did it anyway. I have absolutely nothing to hide. I've published all the documents relating to my firing online. I was fired uniquely for speaking out about this policy. I was at no point accused of lying.
Also tell me that at your trial, at your court case, I would not call it your trial, that probably would be misnomer. At your court case,
yes,
you are accusing certain officials, certain members of the judicial community to be acting at the behest of the UN. Is that what, if I understand it correctly?
Yes. Actually, I'm just repeating what their former colleagues said. My court cases were actually heard in 2019, and the judge was 10 days away from issuing his verdict. And the UN got advance notice of what that verdict was going to be. He was going to find entirely in my favour. So they brought forward a vote in the General Assembly for his successors, and when he arrived at work the next day, he was told he no longer had a job. They didn't even inform the judge in advance of the end of his term to make sure that his judgment didn't see the light of day. Even with the replacement judge, who has never in her 4 years on the bench found in favour of a staff member, she still found that every single claim I am making about the UN handing names of dissidents to the Chinese government is true, and that this is a policy that places the lives and safety of those individuals and their family members in danger. That is a matter of public record in her judgment.
So, but you haven't got a court order in your favour, right?
No, she said that despite that, there's a UN rule that says that no UN staff member may ever criticise a policy of the Secretary General. It does not matter if that policy amounts to complicity in genocide. So she says that the policy itself is dangerous, but that no UN staff member should ever speak up. We should all stay silent and watch the UN be sold out to the Chinese Communist Party.
And do you think the Chinese have carried on with this despite it becoming a public information? I mean, you've obviously blown the whistle some time back, and you've submitted evidence. The court judicial process is also on, has at least been on. Do you think they still carry on with impunity, with brazenness?
That is the UN's court position in my ongoing court cases. The UN says this is a continuing policy.
So how do you want to take this fight forward? I mean, what are your next moves going to be?
Well, yesterday I gave evidence before the United Kingdom Parliament, and they're taking that evidence extremely seriously. I've handed them all the documents to prove what I am saying, so they know I'm telling the truth. I've also made a disclosure to the US Congress, supported by an organization called Whistleblower. So that's a protected whistleblower disclosure to the US Congress, again, giving them all of the evidence. And I'm asking them to conduct an external independent investigation.
So you wish to carry on with your fight. You're not certainly giving up.
No, not at all, because if people are still being placed in danger, then I see it as my responsibility. I swore an oath to protect human rights, not to protect the United Nations.
Thank you very much, Ms. Reilly, for joining NDTV. Thank you very much. Your claims are quite stunning, and I hope, particularly if they are true, then they should be taken to their logical end, not only by the member nations of the multilateral organization, but by the UN itself. Because as I said, out here, public trust is at stake.
Exactly. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of India Global. Goodbye.